Today, you can't pick up a newspaper or scroll online without seeing reference to ESG, climate change, or the energy transition. In this course, ESG 101, we will explain the fundamentals of sustainability and ESG to help you understand how your organization and your work in your organization contributes to a more sustainable future. This course is presented by Sistrio ESG Advisors. I'm Peter Forrester, one of the Sistrio Trio. I will help guide you through this course. I'll be joined by my two co-founders and partners, Kareem Zarifa and Hans Liu, two sustainability experts that will help us get a grasp on the fundamentals. In this course, we will discuss what ESG is, what's driving the growing focus on ESG, how is ESG measured, whether ESG is mandatory or voluntary, what does ESG reporting look like for your organization, and how can you as an employee contribute to your organization's sustainability efforts. And then we'll have some final thoughts on ESG. What is ESG? The world is growing more concerned with climate change and the risks it poses to the economy, people, and the environment. Global warming resulting from greenhouse gas emissions is changing the risks businesses and organizations must deal with. One category of risk relates to the physical risks of climate change: loss of sea ice, melting glaciers, rising sea levels, more intense weather events, and the like. The other category is the transitional risks of transitioning to a lower greenhouse gas emitting economy and how businesses and people can survive and thrive through the transition. The concern has led to a commitment by most countries in the world to become net zero by 2050. Put simply, net zero means we produce less greenhouse gases than we remove from the environment. Climate science tells us that by becoming net zero by 2050, we can limit global warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, limiting much of the damage that otherwise would be caused by climate change. The concern has increasingly led actions by regulators, investors, stakeholders, and employees to understand and address the impacts, positive and negative, organizations are having on climate change. While this has always been important, the need to address climate change and the demand to transition to a lower emitting energy economy has accelerated the need to understand and address ESG impacts. That is where ESG comes in. To understand these impacts, we need to understand an organization's ESG impacts. So let's cut right to the chase and let's let Hans explain what ESG stands for.
Thanks, Peter. Well, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. The E, environment pillar, asks, what material impacts is your business having on the environment, and what risks and opportunities do these things like climate change pose to your business or organization? Example issues include greenhouse gases, energy and natural resource use, water and land management. The S, social pillar, asks, how are you impacting people and stakeholders from your business activities and relationships? Example issues include employee health and safety, diversity, equity and inclusion, or DEI, pay equity and wages, training, relations with Indigenous communities in and around your operations. The G, or governance pillar, asks, how well is the corporate or organization's oversight in relation to understanding risks and opportunities, including those related to climate change and the energy transition? Example issues include board diversity, business ethics, compensation policies, and risk management.
How does ESG differ from sustainability? You have probably heard the terms sustainability or corporate responsibility. Kareem, what is the difference between what is increasingly being called sustainability, or ESG, and the older concept of corporate responsibility?
Well, Peter, sustainability, corporate responsibility reporting, ESG, these are not new, and they've been around for years. Companies have been concerned with how they affect the environment, stakeholders, and how they have good corporate oversight for years. The concept of corporate responsibility as a company's commitment to do good, self-regulate, and report is evolving into common and accepted frameworks and standards for understanding sustainability, measuring it, and reporting on it in a consistent and credible way to third parties. A number of internationally accepted frameworks and standards for reporting on sustainability and ESG have been developed over the last 20 years. Their intent are all the same: to drive transparent, comparable, consistent reporting of how an organization is impacting the economy, environment, and people. Many of these frameworks and standards come at sustainability more from an investor perspective. What risks and opportunities does the company face, and do they have a plan to address risks and capture opportunities? What data do they rely on? What measures are they taking? And are these transparent, comparable with other companies, and consistent across time?
Can you provide some context for how this all comes together? Sustainability, reporting frameworks, standards, regulators? Who does what?
Well, first, ESG exists within a larger sustainability information ecosystem. You can see it from the graphic that there are a lot of parties involved in assessing, reporting on, assuring, and using ESG information. This presents a real challenge for understanding an organization's sustainability performance. The reporting frameworks and standards and the whole ecosystem aim to make reporting of ESG consistent, comparable, and clear over time. This allows users to compare one organization or industry against another from many different perspectives.
So when some people say ESG reporting is just marketing or woke or greenwashing, what do these terms mean, and is it actually true?
Well, greenwashing is when an organization says it is improving its sustainability performance for marketing reasons when it really isn't. Simply saying we are a leader in sustainability or we will be net zero by 2050 without having any plan to get there can be greenwashing. Worse yet, saying you have a sustainable supply chain when some of your suppliers use child labor is simply a misrepresentation. This relates to the woke term, which essentially means that ESG is just a way to make companies look like they are doing more than caring about profits for political or reputational motives. This is not what ESG really is. Ultimately, investors, lenders, and regulators are demanding measurable, consistent, and transparent disclosure by companies on how they will manage risks brought about by addressing climate change and other materially important topics. How will their enterprise value be affected by climate change and other material topics in the short, medium, and long run? If they can't show they are addressing the risks with data and in accordance with converging frameworks and standards, they will find it harder to attract capital and to grow their business.
What is driving the ESG agenda? Kareem, if sustainability and ESG has been around for a while, why is it getting so much more focus recently?
The challenges presented by climate change and the energy transition have brought more focus on sustainability issues and will continue to do so. Taking a deeper look at what drives the focus on ESG, we find a number of different global drivers, which include consumers demanding accountability from companies, employees demanding that their workplace contributes to society, and investors expect the companies they invest in to ensure they have considered and addressed the risks of climate change. With investing and finance, 1 in 3 investors are currently investing or plan to invest in socially responsible products. While on the social license to operate side of things, communities are requiring engagement and increased transparency. As for employees' demands, we see millennials identify corporate sustainability strategies as a crucial consideration for their career decisions.
How is ESG measured? Hans, if all of these reporting agencies and regulators are requiring ESG reporting, how do you actually measure ESG?
Well, at a high level, reporting requires measurement and reporting on the material impacts an organization is having on the economy, environment, and people. One of the major focuses is on how much greenhouse gases, or GHGs, a company is emitting, which we call Scope 1 emissions. In time, there will be a requirement to report on Scope 2 emissions, which are the company's indirect emissions from things like purchasing electricity or greenhouse gases emitted from fleet vehicles. Lastly, there is Scope 3 emissions, which occur up or down the value chain, such as emissions customers cause by using a company's products. ESG performance can be tracked and measured using company-reported data. On the environment side, important measures include carbon or greenhouse gas emissions, pollution emissions, waste disposal and diversion, energy consumption, renewable energy used, the packaging used, land use and preservation, water consumption, recycling, and preservation. On the social side, important measures include diversity and inclusion of the workforce training, health and safety statistics, community investment, level of data and privacy protection, and policies respecting human rights. On the governance side, important measures include diversity and inclusion at the board and management level, management compensation, anti-corruption policies, risk processes, ESG expertise on the board, and delegation of ESG oversight and responsibility.
So Hans, what are the main challenges with measuring ESG?
Well, there are a number of different measurement frameworks and reporting standards that can result in inconsistent measurements across industries. Also, many organizations may not have good data, systems, or processes to conduct the measurements.
Is ESG reporting mandatory or voluntary? It's important to note that under Canadian law, only a certain amount of facilities, such as large oil and gas facilities, are required to report their GHG emissions. However, numerous regulators are developing additional legal obligations to report on a number of different ESG factors that will come into effect over the next few years. Over time, we're seeing a trend to move from voluntary reporting to mandatory reporting. In Canada, mandatory reporting proposals were put forth this year from some of Canada and US regulators, with more expected to come. One question you may have is, if it's not currently mandatory for all organizations to report ESG performance, why are so many reporting regardless? Hans, could you answer this question for us?
Well, the stakes of ESG performance and disclosure are acute and rising for all organizations. ESG is critical to business resilience, and companies that ignore ESG do so at the risk of eroding their long-term value. So why should companies consider ESG? Well, ESG impacts how organizations govern and conduct their business. ESG is a mainstream strategic business issue that stakeholders are demanding. The energy transition is driving businesses to reimagine their operations. Renewables are the fastest way to meet global decarbonization goals and increase energy independence. Renewable energy has a key role to play in supporting sustainability goals, improving energy security, and enhancing economic performance. Sustainable financing and sustainability-linked loans are looking at ESG performance. And finally, organizations must proactively prepare for regulatory shifts, for example, climate and ESG disclosures.
Hans, can you expand on the why of ESG? Why is it important? And to whom is it important?
Let's start with a message from Larry Fink, who is a leading and influential ESG investor. He says, "A company cannot achieve long-term profits without embracing purpose and considering the needs of a broad range of stakeholders. Ultimately, purpose is the engine of long-term profitability. Each company's prospects for growth are inextricable from its ability to operate sustainably and serve its full set of stakeholders." The effect of ESG factors on business performance is receiving increased attention globally and in North America. ESG performance is becoming one of the determining factors for capital allocation and long-term value creation and retention. Most organizations are facing an environment of heightened attention from investors, customers, regulators, employees, and other stakeholders to ESG risk and performance. Recognizing current market momentum and the importance of reflecting material ESG factors within organizational strategy and operations is the foundation of an integrated and cohesive ESG strategy that can unlock the long-term value of an organization.
And so, can poor performance on sustainability or ESG financially impact an organization?
Well, to start, information about an organization's most significant impacts on the economy, environment, and people is the focus of sustainability reporting. While such impacts are of primary importance to sustainable development, they can also lead to negative or positive consequences for the organization itself. These consequences can be operational or reputational, and in some cases, even financial. For example, an organization's high use of non-renewable energy contributes to climate change and could at the same time result in increased operating costs due to legislation that seeks to shift energy use toward renewable sources. Therefore, it would be reasonable to expect that impacts that are important to society today can be seen as a leading indicator of impacts that could become financially material to the organization over time. Consequently, information made available through sustainability reporting can help to identify the financial risks and opportunities associated with an organization's impacts, which in turn can affect its financial valuation.
What does my organization's ESG reporting process involve? Hans, we have covered a lot of ESG theory, such as what ESG is, why it's important, and how it's measured, and the fact that mandatory reporting is on its way. But from a practical perspective of where the rubber hits the road, what does ESG reporting actually involve for an organization or a company?
Well, there is a fairly well-defined process that ESG performance and reporting follows. It typically starts with a maturity assessment. This looks at the current understanding an organization has of its sustainability impacts to the economy, environment, and people. Has it identified the related risks from these impacts, and has it considered the related opportunities that might arise from providing solutions to these risks? Has it committed to improving its sustainability performance over time, and can it measure that performance? Does it know what its Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions are? This baseline is viewed in context of how other organizations in your industry are handling their sustainability impacts. Your organization then develops a sustainability strategy. This strategy is unique to your organization. It's tied to your organization's overall business strategy and what it's trying to achieve, its appetite for risk, and its objective of capturing opportunities through the energy transition. It will include assessments of which reporting frameworks and standards to use, the allocation of resources in each of the E, S, and G areas, and how it will measure and track progress over time. The next step is to conduct a materiality assessment. This step involves tying your organization's strategy and business objectives to the material impacts your organization has identified. Those impacts are what we call material topics, are then prioritized for disclosure. The intent is to publicly disclose the material impacts, both negative and positive, to sustainability. This allows stakeholders such as employees, investors, lenders, regulators, and local communities to make informed decisions about the risks and opportunities the business faces. It also allows tracking over time by these stakeholders so that they can determine if the organization's sustainability performance is in fact improving over time.
So where do the stakeholders you refer to fit into all of this?
Well, the stakeholders have a role to play in a number of different places. One of the first steps your internal or external sustainability team will take is to do a stakeholder mapping exercise. This is where they map out all of the parties that may be impacted by the organization's activities. This mapping exercise is often shared with the stakeholders identified to make sure it's complete and accurate. Additionally, once the materiality assessment is near completion, it will be checked with a representative sample of stakeholders to ensure that it's accurate and complete from the stakeholders' perspective. Engaging with relevant stakeholders is an important part of the process of identifying impacts and assessing their significance, which in turn helps organizations determine material topics.
So what's the next step?
The next step then is to create a roadmap or action plan, if you will. This is a plan the organization will use over the coming months and years to close any gaps between where it's at on its sustainability journey and where it wants to go. And from a near final perspective, external reporting is made. Typically, this is done by publishing a sustainability report for the year just completed, outlining the findings of the materiality assessment, highlighting what work the organization has done on ESG matters, including various performance metrics, and what work it intends to do in the months ahead. The sustainability report is an important document as it will be relied on by stakeholders to make important decisions about the organization. For example, investors will look to see if risks and opportunities, particularly as they relate to climate change and the energy transition, have been identified and are being addressed. So it can impact an organization's ability to access capital to continue growing the business. Lenders might provide lower cost loans for businesses operating in sustainable ways, which can then have a financial impact on the organization's financial performance. Regulators can look at the report to make sure the organization is complying with laws and regulations. Regulators are also increasingly reviewing these reports to make sure that there's no greenwashing. This is where companies make false or misleading claims about sustainability or ESG attributes of their products or services for marketing purposes. There are also a group of rating agencies that review these reports along with other publicly available information and then rate companies against their peers. This information is then used by stakeholders for a number of different reasons and can have an impact on an organization's ability to compete against its peers. And increasingly, employees like yourselves use the report to determine if the organization is a good corporate citizen, because employees want to work for reputable companies that have values and principles aligned with their own.
So is this sustainability process you describe one and done?
No, not at all. Addressing sustainability and ESG issues is a journey. I often refer to it as a marathon, not a sprint. The risks and opportunities being faced by organizations is constantly changing, whether it's through new regulatory requirements, for example related to emissions or carbon pricing, or through business issues such as new technology or emerging competitors. Sustainability issues are always in a state of flux. Because of the ever-changing situation, best practice aligns sustainability reporting with an organization's financial reporting. So on at least an annual basis, and often on a quarterly basis, the sustainability reporting is corrected, augmented, or updated.
How can employees contribute to its organization's sustainability efforts? Kareem, how can the employees who are taking this course contribute to its organization's sustainability efforts?
Well, Peter, this training course is a great first step. Knowledge will help you spot opportunities to support your organization's sustainability goals as they arise. Also, by contributing to and reading your organization's sustainability report, and particularly understanding its business and sustainability objectives, you contribute to making these real. We also know from experience that many of these best ideas come from employees. If you spot ways to improve your company's sustainability performance, like energy savings, reduction in waste, lowering emissions, bring it to the attention of your manager or the person in your organization responsible for sustainability.
Some final thoughts. Sustainability and ESG will continue to grow in importance as organizations such as yours navigate the impacts of climate change, the energy transition, investor and stakeholder demands. Organizations that can report in a transparent, credible, and consistent way that can identify and mitigate the related risks, or better yet, find ways to take advantage of new opportunities, will be the organizations that thrive in the future. Sustainability and ESG is multidimensional. Your organization is already doing a lot of the work related to ESG, such as having a health and safety program, engaging with stakeholders, and asking questions about sustainability at the governance and management level. ESG is an ever-evolving journey, and the key is to continue to build on these beginnings year over year. A few key takeaways. ESG risks will become more acute over time, and no organizations are immune to these ESG risks. ESG directly affects the future viability and long-term value of your business. Organizations' governance of ESG is critical to risk management, access to capital, and value creation, as you will further understand. ESG is not a sprint, but a marathon. The key is to start the race. Thank you for taking the time to complete this Sustainability ESG Introduction Training Program. You've taken the first step toward helping your organization accelerate its sustainability journey. The first step is being aware of how much ESG touches all aspects of your organization's business, and to start to think of ways that ESG can be measured and improved.